Welcome to the second video in the Common Concerns Digitization 101 series. I am Caitlin Oyakun, the Archives Director at Densho.
And I'm Micah Merriman, the Assistant Archivist here at Densho. In our previous video, Caitlin discussed with you the ways you prepare your digital space. Today, we're going to discuss the ways you prepare your physical space, as well as the collections that you're going to be digitizing.
All right, let's go take a look. All right, so first let's look at your workspace. So here's Micah. She's at her actual desk. She spends a lot of time scanning here. And you'll want to make sure that your space is clear of any clutter, since you're going to need to spread your materials out. There should be enough room to lay everything flat and keep things in their original order as you're working. And you want to try to avoid having too much out at once. Otherwise, things can get confusing and you might misplace some items or folders.
Yeah. Importantly, when I start clearing off my desk, I also need to clean it off with a microfiber cloth, just to remove any dust or debris. You want to avoid using harsh chemicals because they could interact with your materials in a way that you wouldn't like. And then I also grab out and make sure it's readily available any supplies I need, like a ruler or a spatula for removing staples. We don't want to use a staple remover because it'll actually damage the material more than it'll help. So I'm just gonna stick that in my desk. And we also use nitrile gloves because they're more dexterous than cotton gloves are, and we don't have to wash them.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in right here and mention that I see that Micah has some drinks at her desk, so very important. You don't want to have any sort of drinks, whether they have lids or not, and obviously no food. So Micah's going to run these down to the kitchen, and then we're going to come back and look at some collections. All right, now let's look at some collections and how we prep the materials for scanning. There are many types of materials you might come across in a collection. Some of the most common for us are photographs, both black and white and color, basic paper documents of various sizes, and even newspaper clippings. Here, Micah has brought out a box of, I believe, entirely photographs, and she is going to talk about how she preps it.
Yeah, so as you noticed, when I pulled the first envelope out, I stuck a flag in. This is actually just acid-free, lignin-free paper, and it's just to help me know where inside this box I pulled those materials from. Since this box is on loan to us from the original owner, we haven't rehoused it. We'll be returning it to them in the same condition they lent it to us in, and we also are saving it because inside this box there are lots of flags with names and all sorts of information that was put in here by the original owner. So when I'm going through photos, I'm just checking to see, like, are these all the same shots? Are there duplicates? If there's anything written on the backs of the photos, any information we're gonna wanna capture on our metadata, like information on the envelope they were stored in. And so that's what we do when we're sort of prepping our materials for scanning for photographs.
Yeah, and photographs are pretty simple, especially if they're all just kept loose and in envelopes. But there's definitely photographs we come across that are a little more complicated, so we are going to show you some photo albums next. All right, so Micah has pulled a couple of photo albums for us to show some more complicated ways that you might have to deal with images before scanning them.
Yeah, so you'll notice that this is an old album, probably circa from the 1920s or 30s. I've already unbound this before and rebound it, so I know it can be unbound. One great way to check is to just sort of like flip through this outer edge and see if there's a nail or anything stuck in it, because then you can't unbind it. But we personally, at Densho, we unbind all of our albums and scan the whole page. That way we're capturing any information that's written on the photo album page itself that refers to the photos, and also because there are lots of photos that you can't remove because they've been glued down, or even in some cases taped down, and we can't pull them off. And so this is actually an example of something that you have to be cautious of when you're scanning, is if something has gotten sticky again because either the adhesive is reactivated or the emulsion's reactivated. You want to be careful when you're going to scan them. If you got to peel something off or separate them, you want to be really careful and with the scanner, you'll actually have to clean it between each use so you don't transfer the adhesive onto anything else. But you should make sure you follow whatever your organization's policy is on digitization for photo albums. Some places like to remove each photo to scan the front and backs. You just want to be careful when you're doing that to not damage the corners when you're reinserting them.
Yeah, and we see a lot of these types of photo albums from, you know, the 30s and 40s, but there's definitely other types of albums that we come across. And Micah has another example for you.
Yeah, this is actually an older album that we would have to book drive because it's actually bound kind of like a program is. So it's loose pages, but each page is folded over and the photos are, you know, stuck in here, and we just don't want to remove them. So we used our book drive to photograph it instead.
And we will talk more about the book drive in video number 3 when we talk about scanning equipment.
Yeah, and finally, everyone's favorite retro albums from the 1970s are the sticky pages, which we also see pretty often here at Densho. We don't, as mentioned, we don't remove the photos from the albums because we don't want to damage any of the photographs before we return them to the owners. So we actually just, again, put this on our book drive and photograph it. And that way we keep any information. If the page is already loose, we might pull it back or use that looseness to adjust the photo if it's out of place.
Yeah, one of the tricky things here is that you can get a lot of glare off of the covers there, so it can be a little hard with the lighting on the book drive, but you work with what works best for you. So
yeah, make sure whatever you're doing, you're following your organization's policies and best practices.
Yes, so that is photograph albums, and now we're going to move on to some different types of paper documents that you might see. All right, so next Micah has brought out a number of items that are your paper-based documents of different sizes and states. So tell us about these.
Yeah, so first thing you'll note is I'm actually now gloveless. I went and washed my hands so they're clean and dry. You don't want to use gloves while you're working with paper because you need the dexterity to make sure that as you're handling like a fragile old letter that you're not going to accidentally tear it while you're, you know, opening it up so that you can scan it. Or, you know, in this case, as I have to, you know, pull it out gently from the envelope that's very brittle and torn and make sure that I'm folding these out, I might find that this has already got a tear forming and I don't want to make it any worse. So those are sort of the things you want to make sure that you're on the lookout for while you're handling paper materials. You also want to check if something is stored in an envelope like this that's original. You want to look for, you know, the sender information and the, you know, the sender and the addressee information and scan those as well to keep with the envelope or keep with the letter. Because you really want it to feel like, you know, you're going through somebody's mail. And then we also have some bound things that would actually go through on our book drive. This does have staples, but because we have to keep it bound while we're photographing it, we actually leave these ones in. Otherwise, you would have all of your pages coming loose as you're trying to scan it. We also have a small, really old notebook that we just check to make sure that there's actually information in here that we would want to preserve over the long term. And if there's lots of blank pages, we might decide to just skip those since there's no, you know, good information on here that we want to preserve in the long term.
Yeah, and when we scan these bound items, we treat them like a full book. So we scan the front cover, the inside cover, and the same with the back, so that when we put these together in a PDF, it looks like you're reading a book.
Yeah. You might even find fun little extras.
Yeah, and make sure you scan all those extras that are inserted in there and possibly loose in the pages.
Yeah. And then finally, we have just like we have a document that actually does have a staple in it. This kind of staple we would remove using our spatula We just go in under the little hooks in the back and we lift them up and remove them. It also has a post-it note that I know is written by the donor. And so before scanning, I would actually just very gently remove it. We frequently remind donors that we don't actually want post-it notes attached to anything, because thankfully this is like a more recent paper and it doesn't lift, but sometimes it can lift the paper itself off and create tears.
Yeah, and staples are just staples and post-it notes are two of the things that we come across a lot. We also see a lot of rubber bands that we have to very gently take off, paper clips, those types of things. All materials that need to be removed before you can even start the scanning process.
Yeah, and you know, your organization might already have done all of this work prior to deciding that this collection your collection would be processed for digitization, so this might not be something you'll run into, but it's something we run into frequently since we process our collections as we scan. So if you're processing something brand new, these are sort of the key things to look out for before you stick stuff on the scanning beds, because things like staples and rubber bands can actually damage the tray.
Well, great. And this goes through, you know, the general things that we come across in our collections that we might be scanning. And in our next video, video number 3, we're going to go into the actual scanning equipment. So scanners, cameras, those types of things. So we look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye.
Bye.